want you to close your eyes for a second. Just, put yourself in a very specific, totally unforgiving place.
A place you really don't want to be in the dark.
Exactly. You are standing on the cold, jagged shores of the Northumberland Strait. And it's the dead of night in late autumn.
Which is already freezing.
Oh, absolutely freezing. You're looking out at this dark, churning body of water that separates Prince Edward Island from the mainland of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick.
Right.
There is a harsh, biting northeast wind whipping across your face, and it's carrying this freezing scent of salt, kelp, and impending rain.
A really specific heavy sea air.
Yeah, exactly. And the water in front of you is just a pitch black void. It is the kind of darkness that feels heavy. It's isolating, almost suffocating. You're completely alone with just the roar of the ocean.
Which is a terrifying sound on its own.
It really is. And then, out of nowhere, the darkness breaks.
It just shatters.
Right. Out on that freezing black water, maybe a mile offshore, a massive 200-year-old schooner appears. But it's not just sailing. Its pure white sails and towering masts are entirely, violently engulfed in raging flames.
I mean, it is an image of pure apocalyptic terror.
Yeah.
The fire is blinding against the night sky, casting these, long, jagged, blood-red reflections across the freezing waves.
Oh, wow.
If you are standing on that shore, you can see the intricate silhouettes of the rigging, the massive wooden hull, all illuminated by this horrific glow.
Right.
It doesn't look like a trick of the light. It feels completely real, completely visceral, and utterly catastrophic. You are basically watching a floating inferno.
Exactly. I mean, you aren't just seeing a strange light in the distance. Your brain is telling you that you are witnessing a human tragedy unfolding in real time.
You're watching people die.
Yes, exactly. But here is the psychological trap. The ship you are looking at, it physically shouldn't be there.
Nope, not at all.
And according to 2 centuries of folklore, deep encyclopedic records, and thousands of terrified eyewitnesses, it might not be a physical ship at all.
Which just makes it worse.
It really does. So today's deep dive is taking us into the cold, murky, and deeply unsettling waters of one of the most enduring maritime mysteries on the eastern coast of Canada.
The legendary ghost ship of Northumberland Strait.
That's the one. We're looking at over 200 years of terrified eyewitness accounts, maritime myth databases, the Ives folklore papers, and most crucially, a 2015 sonar scan of the seafloor. We're trying to figure out what is actually haunting this stretch of the Atlantic.
And we really need to be clear about the territory we are entering today,
Yeah, definitely.
Because this isn't just a simple campfire ghost story meant to scare children.
Right.
We are wading into a highly complex, often terrifying intersection of historical trauma, extreme meteorological physics, and a shocking recent underwater discovery.
A discovery that totally threatens to drag this entire legend out of the realm of myth and right into physical reality.
Exactly. We are going to examine the limits of human perception in the dark, the specific ways the atmosphere can literally weaponize light against our senses, and what actually happens when the ocean refuses to bury its dead.
So before we even attempt to explain away the flames with atmospheric science or sonar data, we really need to firmly establish the anatomy of this nightmare.
The baseline of the myth.
Right. What exactly are people seeing out there in the Strait? Because when you read through the historical archives and the Ives folklore papers, the descriptions aren't vague at all.
No, they're incredibly disturbingly specific.
Yeah.
And the consistency of the accounts is really what makes this phenomenon so compelling for researchers.
I mean, it spans centuries.
It does. Whether you are reading a diary entry from 1850 or a newspaper report from 2008, the vessel is almost universally described as a pristine classic schooner.
Right. So we are talking about a large sailing vessel with, 3 or 4 towering masts?
Yeah, 3 or 4 masts. And witnesses who see it before the fire begins often make a point to describe its striking colors.
Which?
A brilliant, glowing white and gold. It has pure white sails catching the wind. It's an image of absolute maritime perfection. It looks like a ship right out of a painting.
But then that perfection just shatters.
Instantly.
The defining, terrifying feature of this legend, the thing that elevates it from a mere ghost ship to a pure psychological nightmare, is the spontaneous combustion.
Yes. The transition is instantaneous.
As onlookers watch this pristine white and gold schooner, its sails and masts suddenly ignite. And the accounts emphasize that it doesn't start as like a small, smoldering fire in the galley or the cargo hold that slowly spreads.
Right. It's not a slow burn.
No, it is an explosive, all-consuming inferno. The pure white sails instantly become towering sheets of fire.
And this is where the historical accounts become truly harrowing to read.
Yeah, they get dark.
Because it's not just an empty, burning ship drifting on the tide. It is a populated vessel.
God, that's awful.
Eyewitnesses consistently detail the distinctive skeletal outlines of the ship's masts starkly silhouetted against the flames. And within that fiery cage, they see the phantom crew.
The crew is actually visible.
Yes. Witnesses describe seeing the frantic, desperate silhouettes of human beings climbing the rigging. They are trapped in a horrifying struggle for survival, trying to escape the flames by climbing higher and higher into sails that are already burning.
Wow. I want to spend a moment on just the sheer psychological terror of that imagery.
It's intense.
If you are listening to this, try to put yourself in the mindset of a 19th century coastal resident in the Maritimes.
A very different world.
Right. You live in an era where the sea is your entire livelihood. It's your highway and your primary source of food.
But is also your greatest, most lethal threat.
Exactly. A ship burning at sea is a very real, fatal occurrence. For any seafarer in the age of sail, fire on a wooden ship is the absolute worst-case scenario.
Because you are standing on a giant wooden tinderbox.
Yes. A tinderbox coated in highly flammable pitch and pine tar, loaded with canvas sails and hemp ropes, just floating on an icy abyss. There is literally nowhere to run.
You jump into the freezing water or you burn.
Right. To stand on the shore and watch a crew burn to death, only to slowly realize or be told by an elder standing next to you that the tragedy you are witnessing is a phantom. It just completely upends your sense of reality.
You are watching a loop of someone's horrific final moments.
Yeah, and that psychological layer is the foundation of the legend's power. These coastal communities in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island lived and died by the ocean's moods.
They understood the physical, brutal reality of a shipwreck.
They really did. So when they saw this burning schooner offshore, their initial biological reaction wouldn't be awe or curiosity, it'd be visceral panic.
Pure adrenaline.
Yeah, their bodies would react to a crisis because they knew exactly the agonizing deaths those sailors were facing in the flames and the freezing water.
And the subsequent realization that the ship is spectral doesn't lessen the terror.
Not at all.
It transforms it. It shifts from a physical crisis into a profound supernatural dread. The ocean is suddenly not just a dangerous workplace. It is an active, haunted entity.
And the folklore doesn't just treat the ship as a random haunting either. The legend is explicitly, inextricably linked to the weather.
Which is a huge detail.
Right. The ship doesn't just appear on calm, sunny afternoons. It appears specifically before a northeast wind. It acts as a dark forewarning.
Yes, the sources emphasize this connection heavily. The ghost ship of Northumberland Strait is deeply embedded in the region's weather lore.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, in maritime communities along the eastern seaboard, a northeast wind, a nor'easter, is notoriously harsh. It brings violent freezing gales and massive swells.
So it's basically a death sentence if you're caught out in it.
Exactly. So the appearance of the burning ship is interpreted by the locals as a localized weather alarm system. When the burning schooner is sighted illuminating the dark horizon, the coastal communities know a deadly storm is imminent. It's a harbinger of doom.
It functions exactly like a maritime grim reaper. It's not just a haunting vision of a past tragedy. It's a localized, supernatural barometer warning you about the immediate future.
Right.
It's the ocean saying, look at this horrific death. A gale is coming, and if you go out on the water tomorrow, this could be you.
And it's a localized warning for a very specific body of water, too. The maritime provinces of Canada are rich with ghost lore, but our sources make a firm geographical distinction here.
Yeah, I noticed that.
This specific phenomenon, the burning white and gold schooner, belongs exclusively to the Northumberland Strait.
Right, it's highly territorial.
Yeah.
Because if we look just over in the Bay of Fundy, you have a completely different set of legends.
Oh, absolutely.
You have the haunted Isle Height, or the infamous Mary Celeste, which was built right there in Nova Scotia before it became the world's most famous abandoned ghost ship.
The Bay of Fundy has its own dark history of vanishing crews and strange tides.
But the burning schooner is fiercely local. That narrow, shallow, volatile body of water between PEI and the mainland is its exclusive domain.
Which brings us to a critical behavioral question.
Okay, what's that?
If this phantom is tethered to this specific strait, and it looks completely, undeniably real to the naked eye, How do human beings behave when confronted with it?
Right.
What happens when a person's survival instincts and sense of duty are triggered by a blazing phantom?
That is exactly where the narrative shifts from abstract folklore into terrifying, visceral human action. Because when experienced maritime people see a burning ship, they don't always just stand on the shoreline and watch it burn.
No, they try to...
Sometimes they risk their own lives to intervene. And that leads us to one of the most legendary and honestly psychologically devastating events in the entire history of this phenomenon.
The 1900 rescue attempt.
The 1900 rescue attempt, exactly.
The 1900 incident in Charlottetown Harbor is a cornerstone of the Northumberland Strait archives. According to the historical records, a group of seasoned sailors were working at the harbor late at night when they spotted the towering inferno out on the dark water.
So they see the flames.
They saw the flames illuminating the night sky. They saw the silhouettes in the rigging, and they reacted exactly as professional mariners are trained to react.
Which is to say, they didn't hesitate.
No. They believed they were witnessing a catastrophic human tragedy unfolding in front of them, and they moved to help.
Let's reconstruct this minute by minute, because the bravery and the horror of this moment are staggering. It's the year 1900. You are a professional sailor. The air temperature is plunging. The water is near freezing.
It's completely black out, aside from the fire.
Right. You look out into the harbor and see a massive ship burning to the waterline. You don't pause to debate folklore or consider if it's a ghost. Your adrenaline just spikes.
You just go.
These men frantically sprinted to the docks and boarded a small rowboat. They grabbed the heavy wooden oars and threw themselves into the immense physical exhaustion of rowing out into the dark, freezing waters of the harbor.
Just think about the physical toll of that.
They're racing toward this roaring fire, muscles burning, fully preparing themselves mentally and physically to pull charred, drowning men out of the ocean.
Imagine the sensory deprivation and overload of that rowboat journey. The suffocating darkness of the harbor pressing in on them from all sides, broken only by the blinding apocalyptic light of the burning ship reflecting off the chop of the waves.
Yeah, that flickering red light on the black water.
The freezing sea spray hitting their faces as the oars strike the water. The distant, imagined roar of the fire growing closer. They are mentally bracing for a horrific rescue operation.
They're expecting the worst.
They are preparing for the screams of dying men, for the smell of burning wood, melting pitch, and burning flesh. They are putting their own lives at extreme risk in the small open boat in the dark to save strangers.
And then they experience the ultimate cognitive collapse.
The Vanishes.
Yeah. They row furiously, their arms aching, their breath pluming in the cold air. They get within striking distance of the inferno, ready to throw lines and pull bodies from the water. And the massive ship simply vanishes, directly in front of their eyes.
It doesn't slowly burn out.
No, it doesn't sink beneath the waves with a massive hiss of steam. It doesn't capsize. It simply ceases to exist.
The historical sources describe it as vanishing into thin air. One moment, they are facing a roaring, towering wall of fire that is casting heat and light across the water.
Right.
The very next second, they are sitting in a tiny rowboat in pitch-black, freezing water, surrounded by absolute, deafening silence.
God, that silence must have been infinitely more terrifying than the fire itself.
Oh, completely.
Imagine the psychological shock. You're left out there in the freezing dark, your muscles shaking from the adrenaline and the exertion, completely disoriented, realizing that the horrific reality you just risked your life to intervene in was an illusion.
Or a ghost.
Or a ghost. You would question your sanity. The sheer dread of sitting in that dark water, knowing whatever just projected that image, might still be down there with you.
It forces a brutal confrontation with the impossible. It's a deeply traumatic event for the rescuers. And what is so striking about this phenomenon is how that exact same shock echoes forward through time.
What do you mean?
Well, you might assume that as we moved into the 20th and 21st centuries, with the advent of radar, sonar, high-powered motorboats, and a much more rigid scientific worldview, these sightings would naturally disappear.
Like we would map the ocean and dispel the myths.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't disappear. The legend survives entirely intact.
The archives absolutely prove that. I mean, fast forward over a century to modern times, our sources highlight highly documented sightings from as recently as 2008.
That's practically yesterday in folklore terms.
Right. We have a detailed account from a 17-year-old named Mathieu Guerre. He was interviewed by a local newspaper about spotting the ship in Tatamagouche Bay.
And what did he see?
When asked to describe what he saw out on the water, he details the exact same bright white and gold ship. Over 100 years after those sailors rode into the dark in Charlottetown, the specific color palette, the specific rigging, the specific nightmare remains completely unchanged.
And in that same year, 2008, we have an account from an older man, Melvin Langille, a resident of Tatamagouche Mountain. He claims to have seen the burning ship illuminating the water on a cold October night.
Oh, up on the mountain.
Yes. And his reaction to the interviewer, which is recorded in the sources, is chilling in its quiet resignation. He simply stated, "I believe in all that stuff, and I don't know what else it would be."
Wow, I don't know what else it would be.
It's a statement of profound, quiet terror. He saw something so massive, so inexplicable, and so completely out of place in modern times that his logical mind simply collapsed. He had to accept the supernatural explanation because his eyes left him with no other option.
See, I hear that, but I cannot just accept that at face value. We have to introduce some friction here because I look at these sources and I see a massive contradiction.
Okay, lay it out.
I can understand a teenager in 2008 or a guy looking down from a mountain, seeing a weird trick of the moonlight on the fog and thinking, oh, it's the legendary ghost ship. The mind plays tricks.
Sure.
But let's go back to those sailors in 1900. If this is just a myth or a mass hallucination or a trick of the moonlight on the clouds, how on earth did it fool a crew of experienced professional mariners to the point of physical exhaustion? Really exactly what a real ship fire looks like, how it reflects, how it moves on the tide. A mass hallucination doesn't explain the physical fatigue of rowing a boat for miles. Their bodies were reacting to something tangible, something projecting a physical light source in that harbor.
They weren't just seeing things.
Right. You don't row a boat into freezing water because the moon looks a little funny.
That is the crucial threshold we have to cross in this investigation. If the 1900 incident wasn't an encounter with the supernatural souls of the damned, what could possibly mimic a raging three-dimensional maritime disaster so perfectly that it triggers a desperate rescue mission from veteran sailors?
So where does the science point us?
This forces us to examine the extreme, often violent atmospheric conditions of the Northumberland Strait. When we pivot from folklore to complex physics, we find that the natural world is entirely capable of generating physical light sources and projecting illusions so powerful that they can deceive the most experienced human eyes.
I have read the scientific theories in the sources, specifically the work of the New Brunswick scientist William Francis Ganong.
Right, from 1905.
Yeah, in 1905, just 5 years after the Charlottetown rescue attempt, Ganong published a paper completely dismissing the ghost theory. He went straight to atmospheric plasma.
St. Elmo's fire.
Exactly. He proposed that the flaming rigging witnesses were describing was actually a massive, localized display of St. Elmo's fire. But looking at the weather data and the sheer scale of the sightings, I struggle to see how a plasma discharge gets large enough to look like an entire multi-masted ship burning to the waterline.
Can you explain the actual physics of this?
We really have to break down the mechanics of St. Elmo's fire at a molecular level to understand how it could create this illusion. Because St. Elmo's fire is not fire at all. It is a continuous, luminous electrical discharge. It's a form of plasma.
So it doesn't burn wood?
No, it doesn't burn. It occurs when the atmosphere becomes highly charged with electricity, creating a massive voltage differential between the sky and the ground, or in this case, the ocean.
Okay.
This intense electrical field interacts with the gas molecules in the air, ripping electrons away from the nitrogen and oxygen molecules, ionizing them. When those molecules recombine with electrons, they release energy in the form of photons.
Which is light.
Light, exactly. And because of the specific gases in our atmosphere, oxygen and nitrogen, that light isn't orange or red like a wood fire. It glows with an intense blue, violet, or sometimes yellowish-white hue.
Precisely. Now, the key to St. Elmo's fire is where it manifests. It requires a process called point discharge. The electrical field concentrates most intensely around sharp, pointed, conductive objects.
Like a lightning rod.
Like a lightning rod. And on the open ocean, the sharpest, tallest point around is the mast of a ship. So imagine a real, perfectly physical ship, a standard wooden schooner sailing through the Northumberland Strait, just as a massive electrically charged storm system is rolling in.
The storm that the phantom ship always warns about.
Right. The intense electrical field of the storm interacts with the tall, pointed masts and the intricate web of rigging.
So the voltage concentrates on the wood and the ropes, ionizing the air directly around them.
Exactly. The top of the masts, the spars, and the rigging would suddenly erupt in this glowing, brilliant plasma. The electrical discharge physically clings to the shape of the object, So in the dark, the entire skeletal outline of the ship's rigging would be violently illuminated in a glowing, eerie light.
Okay, this perfectly aligns with a crucial detail in the folklore.
Which one?
The legend explicitly states that the burning ship appears before a northeast wind, acting as a harbinger of an impending storm. The folklore is literally describing the exact meteorological conditions required to trigger massive point discharge,
Yes.
the high electrical charge preceding a violent gale. To a sailor in the 1800s, seeing a ship offshore whose rigging has suddenly erupted in an intense glowing white-yellow light just before a storm hits. I mean, it would look exactly like the sails and ropes had spontaneously ignited.
It perfectly decodes the folklore. The myth of the harbinger is actually a highly accurate meteorological observation passed down through generations.
But this theory has a massive flaw that we need to address.
Oh, the Vanishing Act.
Yes. St. Elmo's fire perfectly explains why a real physical ship might look like its rigging is glowing or burning, but it completely fails to explain the Vanishing Act. The 1900 sailors rowed out toward the fire, and the ship disappeared into thin air.
Right. Plasma doesn't make a hull disappear.
Exactly. St. Elmo's fire doesn't make a 200-foot wooden hull cease to exist. If it was just a real ship experiencing plasma discharge, the sailors would have just rowed up to a normal ship glowing in the dark.
You are absolutely right. St. Elmo's fire explains the light, but it doesn't explain the geography or the disappearance. To explain how a massive burning structure vanishes in front of a rowboat, the sources introduce one of the most complex optical phenomena in atmospheric physics.
The Fata Morgana.
The Fata Morgana.
Now, I understand the basic concept of a Fata Morgana. It's a superior mirage, like seeing water on a hot desert highway, but in reverse over the ocean.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
But I have a real problem with applying it to this specific legend. A Fata Morgana requires incredibly still, stable air to maintain the temperature layers necessary to bend light.
Right.
But the folklore, as we just established, explicitly says the ghost ship appears before a violent, howling northeast wind. High winds would violently mix the air, destroying the temperature layers. How can you have a Fata Morgana in a storm? The science actually contradicts the folklore here.
That is an excellent piece of friction, and resolving it requires looking closely at the specific thermodynamics of an approaching weather front in the Northumberland Strait.
Okay, walk me through it.
You are correct that wind destroys mirages. However, the phenomenon occurs before the northeast wind hits. When a strong weather front approaches, it pushes a mass of relatively warm air ahead of it. In late autumn, the water in the strait is freezing cold.
Right.
As this warm air mass slides over the freezing water, it cools from the bottom up. This creates a highly stable, temporary thermal inversion layer, a dense freezing layer of air trapped right on the surface of the water, with a much warmer layer sitting directly on top of it.
So they don't mix.
Not yet. This highly stable inversion exists in the heavy, still air just ahead of the violent storm front.
Ah, the calm before the storm. The atmosphere is holding its breath just before the wind hits.
Exactly. And during that window of intense atmospheric stability, the Fata Morgana forms. These different layers of air have drastically different densities. When light travels between them, it doesn't travel in a straight line. It bends or refracts.
So the sky becomes a lens.
The Fata Morgana acts as a massive atmospheric lens, or atmospheric ducting. It captures light from a real physical object that is located far, far beyond the horizon, perhaps a ship 50 miles away, that is completely invisible to the naked eye due to the curvature of the Earth.
Oh, what?
The thermal inversion bends the light rays coming from that distant ship, trapping them in the duct and projecting the image over the horizon.
It's acting like a massive atmospheric projector screen. But it doesn't just project a perfect image, right? Because the light is passing through fluctuating densities of air, the image gets warped.
Heavily warped, the projected image is stretched vertically. A small fishing boat with a single lantern 50 miles away gets stretched and magnified into a towering, multi-masted structure.
That's terrifying.
And if that distant boat happens to be experiencing St. Elmo's fire, or simply has a massive deck fire, that intensely bright light is captured by the inversion, magnified, stretched into towering pillars of fire, and projected onto the dark canvas of the harbor right in front of the witnesses.
Let's apply this incredibly complex optical physics to the men in the rowboat in 1900. It's a freezing night, the calm before the storm. The thermal inversion is locked in over Charlottetown Harbor. Miles and miles away, over the horizon, a real ship is burning or glowing with plasma. The atmospheric lens bends that light, projecting a towering, stretched image of a burning ship right into the harbor.
A completely 3D projection.
The sailors, operating on pure adrenaline, see a three-dimensional inferno. They row out toward it. But as they move across the water, changing their angle of observation, or as the advancing storm finally pushes the first gusts of wind into the harbor, mixing the air, the thermal inversion shatters.
The atmospheric lens breaks. The refraction instantly stops.
Mm-hmm.
And the towering, highly realistic inferno simply blinks out of existence.
Leaving the men sitting in the freezing dark, utterly convinced they just interacted with the supernatural.
Yes. It is terrifying to realize how easily the atmosphere can manipulate our reality. Between the glowing plasma of St. Elmo's fire and the mind-bending refraction of a Fata Morgana, science can perfectly explain how a trick of light and temperature could create a burning phantom.
And we also have the sources mentioning lunar illusions, right?
Yeah, dense triangular fog banks reflecting moonlight.
Which our brains, suffering from pareidolia, instantly interpret as white sails. So you have a completely robust scientific defense. The mystery is solved by physics.
No.
We can close the books.
It is tempting to stop there, because the physics are so elegant. But if we stop at Fata Morgana, we are ignoring the most disturbing piece of evidence in the entire historical record.
The sonar data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Science can explain how light might trick the eye in 1900, but it cannot explain what the Canadian Hydrographic Service found in 2015.
Right.
What if the origin of this legend isn't just an optical illusion? What if, beneath the mirages and the plasma, there is a physical, catastrophic origin point? To explore that, we have to transition from the glowing skies above the strait back down into the murky, crushing depths of the water.
This is where the entire narrative of the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait takes a massive, chilling turn from meteorological curiosity to historical horror.
It really does.
For over a century, people debated mirages versus ghosts. But in 2015, the conversation fundamentally changed. The Canadian Hydrographic Service was out on the water conducting routine, high-resolution, multi-beam sonar surveys.
Just mapping the seafloor.
Yeah, mapping the seafloor of Pictou Harbour, which feeds directly into the Northumberland Strait. The sonar was pinging the silt bottom, painting a digital picture of the abyss, and they made a shocking discovery. Down there in the freezing dark, buried in the silt, they found an unidentified, very real, physical, wooden shipwreck.
And the specific details of this 2015 sonar discovery are absolutely haunting when you lay them alongside the 200-year-old folklore. Let's look at the hard data.
Okay.
The sonar revealed a vessel that is roughly 60 meters long, that is nearly 200 feet of wooden ship. This was a massive ocean-going vessel, and it is not scattered in pieces across the seafloor like a typical wreck destroyed by a storm.
How is it resting?
It is sitting perfectly upright in the silt bottom at a depth of only 12 to 15 meters. That's just 39 to 49 feet below the surface.
It's just sitting there in the dark, perfectly intact, like it's still sailing along the bottom of the harbor.
Yes.
Because the water in the strait is so cold, and the silt creates an anaerobic environment, the wooden hull has been remarkably preserved.
Exactly. And when dive teams investigated the sonar anomaly, they found key details that complicate the myth. The wreck features large, intact wooden propellers, indicating it was a steam-driven vessel, not purely a sailing ship.
Okay, hold on to that thought because we'll come back to the propellers.
But the most chilling fact, the single detail that instantly linked this physical rotting wreck to the 200-year-old folklore of the burning phantom, is the condition of the wood itself.
The fire damage.
The hydrographers found that the wreck shows unmistakable heavy signs of severe fire damage.
I want the listener to really visualize the implications of this. You have a 200-year-old legend passed down through generations of a massive wooden ship that bursts into flames and vanishes in this specific stretch of water. And then, at the bottom of the very same harbor, resting silently in the mud, you find a massive wooden ship, deeply scarred by fire, sitting upright in the dark. We need to treat this discovery with the immense dread and respect it deserves because these were real people who died.
Absolutely.
Let's reconstruct what the final moments of this 60-meter ship might have been like, based strictly on the physical evidence found by the Hydrographic Service.
Based on the state of the wreck, we know this was a catastrophic, unsurvivable event. A 60-meter wooden ship is a massive, complex structure. To sustain fire damage so severe that the vessel founders and sinks, the blaze must have been an uncontrollable, roaring inferno.
It wouldn't have been a small galley fire.
No. Picture that night in Pictou Harbour, perhaps over a century and a half ago. The crew is on board. A fire breaks out, perhaps in the engine room or the cargo hold. On a heavily tarred wooden ship of that size, once a fire breaches the upper decks, it moves with terrifying predatory speed.
The pitch and tar just ignite.
The radiant heat would have been unimaginable, melting the pitch right between the deck boards.
Imagine the absolute panic of the crew. The horrific realization that the ship is lost and the lifeboats are either burning or inaccessible. The flames would have grown so high they illuminated the entire harbor, reflecting off the black water like a beacon of horror.
It would have been vividly, traumatically visible from the shores.
And then the structural failure. As the fire consumes the hull down to the waterline, the freezing ocean rushes in. But the massive weight of the steam engine and the propellers drags it straight down.
It doesn't even have time to capsize.
Right. It sinks perfectly upright, descending through the smoke, slipping under the freezing blackness, hitting the silt bottom 15 meters down, and just stopping. The fires instantly hissing out in the crushing dark. The sheer, terrifying tragedy of that event is overwhelming.
It really is.
Could the fiery, agonizing demise of this actual physical wooden ship be the very real tragedy that birthed the 200-year-old ghost story?
It is a profound psychological possibility. Traumatic, highly visible events leave deep scars on coastal communities. If the locals on the shores of Pictou Harbour and the Northumberland Strait stood on the beaches and witnessed this massive vessel burn and sink with its crew trapped aboard, the collective trauma of that night would be immense.
That memory would easily have been passed down through generations.
A historical tragedy slowly morphing into a supernatural legend as the decades pass, as a way to process the grief and fear. The folklore even hints at these historical origins. There are tales in the Ives papers suggesting the ghost ship might have originally been an American privateer from the War of 1812.
The cultural memory is clearly searching for a real, physical ship to pin the haunting onto.
Exactly.
But this is where I have to point out a fascinating historical contradiction in the facts, something that I really wrestled with when reading the sources.
Okay, what is it?
The legend, the thousands of eyewitness accounts for the last 200 years, explicitly and consistently describe a schooner, a classic sailing ship, with towering masts and pure white sails. But the 2015 wreck, the divers specifically found large, intact wooden propellers. It was a propeller-driven steamship, not a pure sailing vessel. If this wreck is the origin of the myth, how do we reconcile the sails with the propellers? Did the 2015 survey find the wrong ship? Or is human memory just that fallible?
This contradiction is actually a beautiful illustration of how folklore operates and amalgamates over time. Legends are rarely clean, linear histories. They are messy patchworks of cultural trauma, atmospheric anomalies, and actual events.
Right.
To reconcile the propeller with the sails, we have to look at maritime history in the mid to late 1800s. This was a transitional era. Early steamships didn't abandon sails immediately. They were hybrid vessels.
Oh, I see.
They had large propellers and steam engines, but they still carried full masts and sails to conserve coal on long voyages.
Ah, so the ship at the bottom of the harbor likely had both.
Exactly. When the fire broke out, the massive canvas sails and the wooden masts would have been the first things to violently ignite, creating the towering, fiery silhouette of a burning schooner visible from the shore.
And the heavy steam engine and propellers are what dragged the ship straight down upright to the bottom.
But the visual trauma of that blazing rigging is what burned itself into the memory of the witnesses on the shore.
And over time, as the story is told and retold, the mechanical details of the propellers are forgotten, but the terrifying image of the burning sails remains.
Precisely. It is highly probable that the Northumberland Strait already had older, vague myths of ghost ships, perhaps tied to general maritime superstitions. Then, the very real, highly visible, and horrific fire and sinking of this massive hybrid ship occurs.
The layers on top.
The visual trauma of that inferno is so powerful that it gets grafted directly onto the older myth. The physical ship sinks into the silt, but the memory of the fire merges with the classic archetype of the white and gold schooner, creating a hybrid nightmare that haunts the Strait for the next century.
It's a psychological amalgamation of a very real tragedy and a pre-existing fear of the ocean. That amalgamation makes absolute sense. It takes a very real human suffering of that fire-scarred wreck, the physical reality of the atmospheric fata morgana, and elevates the entire thing to myth. And whether the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait is a trick of the light, the restless spirit of a burned crew, or a complex psychological mixture of both, it has achieved something remarkable.
It has climbed out of the water.
It has taken on a life of its own on land. It is no longer just a maritime hazard or a weather warning. It is a cultural cornerstone of the Canadian Maritimes.
This transition from a localized maritime warning to a broader cultural icon is where the sources take us in the final stage of our analysis.
Right into pop culture.
The legend has been deeply immortalized in modern culture, ensuring its survival far beyond the oral traditions of the 19th century sailors or the sonar screens of modern hydrographers. The most prominent example in our sources is the 1988 song Tales of the Phantom Ship by the acclaimed Canadian artist Lenny Gallant.
Lenny Gallant is a beloved singer-songwriter who actually hails from Rustico, Prince Edward Island. That gives him a profound, inherent geographical and cultural connection to this specific lore.
It's his backyard.
The song debuted on his album Breakwater, and the lyrics we have in our sources are essentially a perfect, poetic distillation of the absolute horror we've been talking about for the past hour.
They really paint a picture.
Listen to the vivid imagery he uses. There's a burst of flame and a flash of light, and there on the tide is a frightening sight. As a tall ship all aflame lights up the sky, tales of the Phantom Ship, from truck to keel in flames. She sails the wide Northumberland Strait, no origin, no one knows her name.
From truck to keel in flames. That line alone captures the total, consuming, inescapable nature of maritime fire.
It really does.
The song acts as a modern-day ballad, functioning in the exact same psychological way the old campfire tales did in the 1800s. It preserves the specific anatomy of the myth. It tells the listener exactly what the ship looks like, what it does, and where it sails.
And it's not just regional folk music keeping it alive, either.
The sources note its influence spreading into wider modern media, such as a specific narrative reference in the eerie, internationally popular podcast, Alice Isn't Dead.
The lore is expanding its territory far beyond the shores of PEI.
And it even reaches the level of official, state-sanctioned recognition. In June 2014, Canada Post issued a special official postage stamp depicting the Northumberland Strait ghost ship.
And they leaned heavily into the horror aesthetic. They deliberately issued the stamp on Friday the 13th as part of a Canadian ghost story series.
Which is a fun marketing gimmick, but if you look deeper, it really makes you ask a profound question about human psychology. Why do we immortalize our trauma?
It is a critical question in folklore studies. Why do we take terrifying legends, stories that represent our ultimate vulnerability to the elements, the chaotic indifference of the ocean, and the agonizing certainty of death, and put them on our government postage stamps or sing about them in our folk music?
What's your take on it?
I think it's a coping mechanism. It's a psychological strategy known as taming the monster.
Right.
The ocean is vast, chaotic, and completely indifferent to human life. It can freeze you, drown you, or burn you alive without a second thought. For coastal communities, that is a terrifying daily reality to live with.
You never know what the sea will do.
You send your husbands, your sons, your daughters out onto that water, and you know they might not come back. So we create art, we write folk songs, we print stamps.
We put it in a box.
Exactly. By turning the raw, uncontrollable horror of a shipwreck into a structured narrative, into a piece of art that has a beginning, a middle, and an end that we can hold in our hands or sing together in a pub, we shrink the monster down. Art ensures the Phantom Ship continues to sail through the public consciousness, but it puts a frame around the fear. It gives us an illusion of control over the abyss.
That is a deep psychoanalytical interpretation, and it aligns perfectly with the function of folklore. We master the trauma by turning it into narrative. It becomes a shared cultural heritage, a point of community bonding rather than an isolated, paralyzing personal terror. We sing the song together to acknowledge the danger of the sea without letting it paralyze our society.
But I want to push back on this cultural celebration of the myth because I think it creates a dangerous psychological feedback loop.
Okay, in what way?
Think about the timeline we established. The Lenny Gallant song comes out and becomes a massive hit in 1988. The Canada Post stamp goes into circulation in 2014. Now, does modern pop culture actually cause more modern sightings?
Oh, that's interesting.
Look at 2008. We talked about Matthew Giguère, the 17-year-old, and Melvin Lungiel on the mountain. If you are a listener out there, ask yourself, is it possible that people are unconsciously primed by the culture around them?
The priming effect.
Yeah. If you grew up in PEI, listening to Lenny Gallant on the radio and seeing stamps of burning ships on your mail, the moment you look out at the strait and see a strange trick of the moonlight on the fog, or a flash of St. Elmo's fire, your brain doesn't just see ambiguous light.
It connects the dots for you.
It instantly sees the specific white and gold schooner because the culture has already programmed that exact image into your subconscious.
The psychological concept of priming is undeniably at play here. When the human brain is confronted with ambiguous, confusing sensory data, like a fata morgana, heavily distorting a distant light source, or a dense fog bank reflecting the moon in a strange geometric shape, it frantically searches its memory banks to categorize what it is seeing.
It hates the unknown.
It hates the unknown.
Yeah.
If you live in a cultural environment where the burning schooner is a prominent, celebrated touchstone, your brain is highly likely to retrieve that specific file and overlay it onto the ambiguous light.
So you're not lying.
You aren't lying when you tell the newspaper you saw a ghost ship. Your brain legitimately constructed a three-dimensional image of a burning schooner for you out of the atmospheric light, using the cultural template provided by the songs and the stamps. The culture creates a self-sustaining feedback loop that guarantees the sightings will never, ever stop.
So the ghost ship is not just one thing. It is a terrifying, complex chimera built out of extreme meteorological phenomena, the mind-bending physics of atmospheric refraction, the relentless power of human storytelling, and most hauntingly, the very real physical trauma of a fire-scarred wreck resting in the dark silt of Pictou Harbour.
We have covered incredible ground in this deep dive, peeling back the layers of a 200-year-old mystery.
We started with the sheer, terrifying visual anomaly of the burning white and gold schooner appearing as a harbinger of the northeast wind.
We examined the visceral, desperate human reaction, specifically the immense courage, the physical toll, and the tragic cognitive dissonance of the 1900 rescue attempt by the Charlottetown sailors.
We broke down the brilliant, complex atmospheric science, the glowing ionized plasma of St. Elmo's fire, and the atmospheric ducting of the Fata Morgana.
And finally, we confronted the chilling, fire-scarred reality of the 2015 sonar discovery, a physical grave beneath the waves that anchors the myth in historical blood, reminding us of the true, agonizing cost of maritime travel.
It is a profound, unsettling reminder of how the ocean's vastness leaves humans feeling incredibly vulnerable. The sea is a liminal space where extreme physics, historical tragedy, and human psychology are constantly bleeding into one another.
If you stand on the dark shore of the Northumberland Strait today, you feel that freezing wind on your face, you look out at the suffocating black water, and it's not hard to understand how a trick of the light or the memory of a tragedy could manifest as the burning souls of the damned.
The marine environment demands our absolute respect, and its immense scale naturally fosters a deep, primal sense of mystery. It forces us to confront how small we really are.
It really does.
And that leads me to a final lingering thought I want to leave you with, something to explore on your own long after this deep dive ends.
Let's hear it.
We've seen how natural atmospheric phenomena can explain the phantom lights, and how the 2015 sonar discovery of an upright burned wooden wreck provides a terrifying physical origin for the nightmare. It forces a massive shift in how we view history. If the legendary ghost ship of Northumberland Strait is actually tethered to a real ruined hull sitting 15 meters down in the mud, what other fictional folklore is real?
Wow.
What other maritime myths, legends, and ghost stories written off in our history books as the silly superstitions of uneducated sailors are actually rooted in physical truth? What other massive, fire-scarred shipwrecks holding the tragic final moments of forgotten crews are just waiting in the freezing dark silt, waiting to be discovered by modern sonar, ready to prove the old ghost stories right?
It truly makes you wonder what else the abyss is hiding, just out of sight.
Think about that the next time you look out over a dark, churning body of water. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait. Keep questioning the shadows, and we will see you next time.